This is the third episode of our series, and I'm extremely excited about this one. I feel with every episode, we are learning something new. We are hopefully becoming better presenters. I definitely feel more comfortable to be in front of the cameras. But the reason I'm extra excited about this one is because this is going to be an active session where like we'll have AI in action. We will do some designing and prototyping as well as go about like using different tools available to plan building a product, conceptualize it all the way to prototyping it, and maybe do a lightweight MVP build. So I think that the action part, the doing part is what excites me the most. Let's dive in.
All right, let's do it. The first time we're doing a screen share on the podcast. So, to just set the stage, what I want to demo today is how I got from a very half baked set of problem statements to the beginning of a solution implementation. And I had this topic in mind. This area of job seeking and interview management has a lot of struggling moments for candidates. The idea is to use generative AI to get to the prototypes and start testing the solution in the market. I thought of kind of breaking this down into three stages. The first one I thought about was, yeah, getting from that problem statement, that list of problem statements, to an initial product requirements document. The second phase was getting from the PRD to a basic MVP. MVP has different definitions for different people. Obviously, my idea was, what's that first idea, or what's that first solution I want to test with people to get their feedback? So something that I can show job seekers, and it's not half baked, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. It's a very basic feature set. What could that be? And then break that apart into what are the feasibility risks, and so what could be those feasibility prototypes and proof of concepts that I need to build there. And finally, once I have thought through all of that, I wanted to get to implementations and code generation to be able to build those prototypes. And thinking through what two kind of tools, what would those tools need to do in order to help me through these steps. The first stage I thought needed to be really free flowing because I didn't want to immediately narrow down the problems. I knew I had some problems at the back of my mind, but I didn't. I wasn't like 100% married to those specific problem statements. So I wanted to stay broad, have an exploratory conversation with the AI, and just go from my initial thoughts to something a little more structured. But I had the end goal in mind to get to something that looked like a product requirement, an initial basic product requirements document. And the second phase, like just analyzing that PRD and thinking through being lean and thinking what's that minimum MVP, and then what are the riskiest areas of that MVP that I need to build and test first. This would require like some structured logic, some reasoning. Um, and in the final stage, obviously I wanted to use AI to generate some code. And
So I have a question for you before you reveal all the tools.
yeah,
So as you are like working through this, like using the Gen AI tools for this problem statement, how did this process change for you compared to like when you didn't have the AI tools? Like from the flowchart, it looks like the order of operations is the same where you go from a problem statement to a PRD to MVP, POC, prototype, and so on. So I'm just curious, like what has changed for you compared to not using the AI tools and with these AI tools?
I think at a high level, nothing changes. This is the idea is to use these tools to make this process quicker. Check your blind spots. If you're one person, you can maybe miss things. And at every stage, these tools, and we'll see that they kind of exceeded my expectations on how much they can assist you. And I really love that idea of them being a co-pilot, that they keep you on track. They make sure that you're not missing things, as long as you use them the right way, obviously, since it's a tool
Yeah.
to be as good as how well you can use them. So yeah, coming to the tools themselves, the first was fairly easy. We've heard a lot about voice mode from ChatGPT, and that's what I use to just have a very natural voice mode conversation. And maybe I can start off with showing you what I did there. So again, this is voice mode. I just started off with asking ChatGPT whether it's live, can it hear me, and then I just started speaking to it very naturally and just told it I'm thinking about creating this interview assistant and want it to be this AI agent, and I want to get to a product requirement document for that. But first, instead of telling it what problems I had at the back of my mind, I said, and as the first step, can you identify what problems people might face during their interview rounds and how an assistant might help with that? And
Interesting. Uh, can you zoom in just a bit?
yeah, see if this
Yeah.
works.
I like that approach that you sort of went with an open mind, and truly just going through the discovery phase where like you have an idea of like what the problem areas might be, but wanted to like brainstorm with ChatGPT in this case. But I think brainstorming is always a great place to start.
So yeah, I said let's start with that. Let's try thinking through what are the different struggling moments, main points that come up in the journey of a candidate, and just to kind of set some boundaries of uh, which areas it should think about. I said it should start from the journey of a candidate receiving an email about an interview being scheduled, all the way to be receiving their job offers. And the output was obviously as you expect from ChatGPT. It's great, and this is still voice mode, so I'm just listening to these. And again, obviously, we're going to validate these the desirability assumptions here. But just knowing that this AI is kind of on the same page as me, and it obviously identified a few more things, which eventually I will not pick to solve. But at this stage, I just wanted to leave it general. Let's not focus too quickly. And then I just listed to kind of list through it again because obviously when you're listening, you're not really seeing the text. So I wanted to listen to it one more time. And I just went through it and said, that's a good list. Now let's focus on what an AI agent or an AI assistant can solve in this because there's very broad problems. But I kind of want to, what I see is an AI agent can probably help a lot in this area. And again, not to give it too many hints into where I want it to go, but just see what it comes up with. And it was kind of a hit or a miss. Maybe I thought that it was going to come up with more problems and maybe it's going to narrow the problems down, but it just said, okay, AI can help in all of these areas and it can do all of these things, which is fine. But the next step was, okay, at this stage, I know that I'm not going to be solving all of these problems, but I need to see something and to be able to read and think through it a little bit. So I said, why don't you just take a shot, create an initial PRD? And I asked it to generate that initial PRD document as an artifact. And so it generated something here, and this is the final version. But if I go through like the initial thing it came up with, I mean, as expected, it does a good job of structuring things. You have an introduction, problem statement, key features, technical requirements, UI UX, and then the development deployment plan, success metrics. Pretty standard sections of a PRD. I didn't really need so much of this at this stage, but it's always nice to kind of double check, is it on the same page as you? And I noticed that it had picked a few target users here: job seekers, recruiters, hiring managers. I was obviously going to only focus on job seekers, and came up with a whole bunch of problem statements that we'd already identified. So in the next step here, this is again not voice mode, but this is text to speech. So it's just dictation, which is why I've got some of these things from PRT instead of PRD. But I just asked it to make a few changes and narrow things down. So first of all, I just want to focus on job seekers. And now that I've thought through all the problems, I've seen what problems ChatGPT has suggested. I wanted to now narrow things down to the initial problems that I had in mind. So I said just narrow it down to these three problems. And it did a good job of that. And I said update the PRD accordingly. And as you can see in the next few versions after the first one, it just stuck to job seekers as the target users and the three problem statements here. So yeah, at this stage, obviously this is not something that I want to send to a development team and start development, right? This is still discovery. And so the PRD at this stage is just kind of a place where you can have all your thoughts in one place about the kind of solution that you want to build.
I like this. So you you started using this to brainstorm, gather ideas, and then you were adding context of what you had in mind, and that context helped narrow down like where you wanted to focus on. And I feel like that's one thing that like won't go away because as you're using these Gen AI tools, it doesn't have the context that you have. So like you kept providing it context and it kept refining the output to make it fit to what you had in mind.
Yeah, and in this case, I didn't, but I may have picked up a couple of problems that I didn't think about. So just went broad initially and then narrowed it down to what I really want. And yeah, the rest of the conversation here was not even PRT related, and I won't even go through that. But it's like, okay, at this stage, I can't keep calling it AI interview assistant. So just ask for a few names, give me some suggestions here, and some. I need a working name so that I can refer to the solution in some way. By the way, before we got to this final version, I actually modified a bunch of stuff in the PRD manually. And then I gave it the updated PRD and I said, update your document artifact here as well, because I wanted to be able to come back to this and look at all the different modifications that I've made and where I've ended up. So I took the PRD from ChatGPT, but also modified it and then fed it back into ChatGPT and said, okay, this is what I have and keep it with you. And I might need to come back and ask a few more questions or make changes later. But yeah, that was it. This is an initial PRD, and the next step was to figure out how to get from this to an MVP, and how can we be super lean, and what are those prototypes that we need to build. So in this case, this was a little different. This needed more structured analytical thinking, logic, and reasoning. So the obvious choice was a reasoning model, and I decided to pick Gemini. Uh, I wanted to use a different tool because I didn't want to run into the problem of hitting like the free tier limits. So I just switched to Gemini, and there's a new Gemini 2.0 Flash Thinking, which is a reasoning model, and it works pretty fast. And I think it has a bigger context window, so that worked well for this because I didn't know how many prompts, how long this was going to take, how long a conversation I was going to have with Gemini before I got to what I wanted. So I kind of liked the idea of using Gemini for this step. And also, it was a new release at the time, and I wanted to give it a shot. So coming to Gemini, sorry, let me just go all the way up here. This time I did it. I didn't start in any exploratory fashion, just straight to the point. Here it's a PRD, and I want to focus on the first phase, the MVP. And just coming back to the PRD here for a second, the reason I mentioned I want to look at the first phases, the deployment plan here already had the different phases, and I didn't even care what was in phase 2 or 3 because I was just focused on the MVP. So in phase 1, I had these 3 points, and I modified these 3 points a couple of times until I was kind of satisfied of what the MVP needs to have. And so this is why I referred to this. I said, look at the first phase, the MVP. That's what we're targeting here. So please create the user stories for the MVP. And I just pasted the whole thing here. It got to thinking, as these reasoning models do. You can see them thinking. And what I really like about this is, as you see it thinking through what you want, you can kind of already predict the direction that it's going in. So you can already start sort of seeing what the final output is going to be like. So um, if it did not show its thinking, then we'd just be waiting, right? We'd be in suspense, don't know what it's going to come up with. But since it's actually communicating and telling us what is going on, you can kind of follow along. And so the final output makes sense once you know how it got there. And I
Yeah,
was
I like that too, like when it shows the thinking part, because the AI models are somewhat of a black box for us. So I think they are powerful, but we don't know like how it's determining what the output is or how it's coming up with like any answers, any like what the reasoning is, as he said. So I feel like the thinking part is good to follow along, and it starts to establish a bit of a trust of like, okay, it actually understands what I asked it to do, and it you gain confidence in what the output will be. So I've definitely like that aspect as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it mentions this is experimental, but to me, it did a great job. And we'll talk more about what it did really well as we look at these responses here. But the initial draft of user stories was pretty spot on. Like, I didn't want to get into the weeds so much, but I read through it and it came up with 8 user stories. It did a great job. I didn't even need to prompt it further. I was fairly happy with what it came up with. And then I just asked, what's the best way to build this? I wanted it to be as lean as possible. And as you can see, I didn't put a lot of thought into the prompt. I just said, hey, this is a reasoning model. It should be able to kind of figure out what I want. And so the only thing I expect is I want your solution to be as lean as possible. I didn't even go into why or anything. Immediately, when I was looking through what it was thinking, I knew the output was going to be fantastic. It was already doing a pretty good job of fleshing out what it means to be lean and what type of solutions would work. And I thought that I would have to iterate on this multiple times and force it to try to be even leaner. But I was pleasantly surprised in how it approached this because it didn't give one lean solution, but it also went into ways to make it leaner. Here it says for the absolute leanest MVP, focusing pure on functionality, a basic HTML, JavaScript front end, minimal styling. And then on its own, it went into proof of concepts. So did a really great job. Even gave an example of an ultra lean first step, and even simpler than the web app. I would obviously not go this lean, but it said, yeah, just do a command line tool, simple Python script that you can run manually. I would actually use this something like this for POCs and feasibility prototypes. Yeah, but probably not
Yeah,
an MVP that I'd show to initial customer base or anything. But it's fantastic that it suggested something like that.
yeah, this is quite impressive. I feel like what you're doing is typically what would be like someone from the product team, someone from the design team, and then engineering team, like at least 3 members or 3 teams, like working through the same problem and trying to see what the end state is, but simplifying what the first iteration of the MVP will be, and then thinking from all angles because it's trying to. I think there was a line there about like APIs and POCs that can be built, and there was a line of like what can be the most critical but most simple user experience. I also saw there was a note about like thinking about compliance and like data consent. So I guess it's beyond those 3 teams. So it's really like making the process from ideation to initial build, at least conceptually, and putting together that plan much more streamlined, which can drastically increase the speed implementation for many PMs out there and for many companies out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things that it mentioned, definitely I would not have thought about at the MVP stage. Like you mentioned, compliance. I think what it did is, again, going back to that concept of the AI covering your blind spots. I think it did a pretty good job here because you can be laser focused. These are the problems I want to solve. I want a basic MVP, and feasibility seems to be the biggest risk in this area. And so I want to quickly think about what type of prototypes I can build because I want to quickly get to an MVP that I want to put out there and just start getting some feedback. And in that tunnel vision, you can miss a few things that you need to think about, which you will eventually get to
Yeah,
and you will think about later. But just that prompt to keep that in the back of your mind at this stage is always nice. But here in the next step, just to explain my next prompt, I want that AI agent function to be core here. I had to then prompt it to change this to be an AI agent. I only use LLMs for the reasoning and test generation. So that MVP, one of the main things it's going to test for me is whether I can actually build an AI agent that's good enough to handle these tasks. And so I just prompted there. Once I prompted it, obviously it did a great job. Um, Modified the user stories, went a little overboard with trying to make everything LLM enhanced, honestly. But yeah, a couple of prompts later, where I said, yeah, just give me the MVP plan and with all the user stories. And then I said, yeah, forget about what updates you've made. Just give me a polished MVP plan of everything that we've discussed so far. Next step, I wanted to get to a user journey because we only have user stories written on an MVP plan, but you always want to visualize what that user experience is going to be like. And I thought, okay, let's see, this might be a little bit challenging for the AI. It's going to come up with something, but is it really going to do a good job with it? I wasn't sure. So I said, okay, let's start with envisioning a user journey for this lead MVP. Let's go through what the user experience will be like. Walk me through it. And again, exceeded expectations. It just imagined a persona, Sarah, marketing professional, actively seeking new role, and Sarah's using Interview Pilot to manage a job interview process. And this was a nice step where I could verify if we're on the same page because I do have a user journey in my mind, but I'm also seeing what it came up with.
When you were creating the like prompting for user journeys, did you ask for it to create like rough wireframes, so like visualize the user journey? Because I think that could be also an interesting prompt to create a visual walkthrough in addition to like the detailed text.
That's, that's actually a great suggestion. And I think it didn't even occur to me that I should try this because I didn't think it could generate stuff like that at this stage. Working through it manually, there is a difference. I wouldn't have done the user journey in this textual format. I would obviously, we would probably use stickies on a whiteboard and try to create use a story map. But I was at this stage pretty happy with the user journey. I had the PRD, and I could not think about what kind of feasibility prototypes I should do. And I just started with one of them. I said, okay, let's see where this goes. At this stage, I was sort of ready to take these user stories, user journey, and then start generating code. But I just stuck with it a little bit longer, and I said, okay, I want you to start with POC for the LLM-powered email classification. I identified that can an LLM properly classify emails as interview requests or interview related? So can it do those levels of classification well? And that's also core to the AI functionality that in the solution. So it was a good place to start for a feasibility prototype. Um, Obviously, at this stage, I don't think I expected to generate an actual AI agent, like maybe a React agent, and I don't know, use land graph to kind of create a basic prototype for this. So it gave a very functional prototype. It just said, yeah, use LLM API calls here. But this is I think, a good place to talk about preserving your context window because I think with my next prompt, I made a bit of a mistake because I didn't obviously understand a lot of this Python code in the sense that I didn't know whether this was just ready to put into a Google Cloud function and start to use and maybe feed it some dummy data. What would be the entry point? And so I think my next prompt was asking it to kind of explain after I add LLM calls and deploy it, will this code respond to just a API post request? Like I didn't see any way in which I could readily use this. And then it got to explaining this whole thing. But my suggestion would be we shouldn't do this in the same chat, like these tangential discussions. Going forward, I think I would do all these discussions in separate chats because in a lot of these conversations, you have to worry about the fixed context window size. And the longer you run these conversations, the worse the responses are going to get because eventually it's going to start losing some of that initial context and the quality of the responses will slip. So one thing I learned here was to be very structured and think through your prompts well, keep them nice and crisp. And eventually I got back to the main thread because the next thing I wanted from it was some testing data. I wanted some emails that I could test my prototype with. So I asked it to create some sample emails. I said, give me 10 test emails, 5 emails that are interview requests and 5 emails that are not interview requests. And it was pretty good. 5 of them are actually interview requests. Some of them actually interview related, not really interview requests. And then I asked for 10 more emails that are just not interview related at all. And I challenged it to be a little creative. Great job with this as well. random emails, catch up for coffee, order confirmation for online shopping, invitation, company social event. Pretty great. It got creative and got a good list of emails to test the classification out with. Building these products, the evaluation step is so important. So you always want to have test data. And this was probably the next question I should have asked and not polluted my context window with random technical questions. At this stage, I was ready for some implementation. I used Plot, Sonnet 3.5, so generally considered pretty great for code generation. Now we have 3.7 as well. My plan was to put this MVP plan into Claude and just have a go at creating an initial code base for it. I'd not recommend doing it exactly this way. I took the entire user journey that it had
Yeah.
generated, pasted it, gave it that context, and I also gave it all the user stories. And I said, I want you to build me an application called interview. The goal of this application would be this. And all of the logic of each user story, it said it'll be performed by an AI agent. And that's a prototype that I'm doing separately. So I just said I've already coded that in Python. So just leave placeholders for that logic. And first get started with an implementation plan and then generate the front end code. And I think this was my third prompt trying it. And initially, the one or two times that I tried it, it immediately started generating a lot of code files, and very quickly it hit the limit. And I know I will eventually subscribe to Pro, and then I'll get a bigger limit. But I think you always run into the context window limits. So I think a good way to do it, if I were to do this again, I'd probably break it up into small things. The first couple of times, I just tried to get it to generate all the front end and back end code, everything. Give me the whole um, MVC architecture, just build everything for me, and it continuously hit that limit, and I had to start another chat. So that I wouldn't recommend it. That didn't work out so well. Finally, here I said I just want the front end code, and I gave it all this context. And it did a good job of creating some kind of implementation plan here. Generated a whole bunch of files and hit the max length for a message. And it said you can just write continue and you'll continue. So that's what I did. Generated a whole bunch of files, even some like sample Python code for the backend, even though I didn't ask for it. And I think it tried, but I downloaded all the files and then I put them into the project structure that it recommended. And the first time I tried to run it, loads of issues. So at this stage, I'm in Cursor and I'm trying to fix things. But yeah, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was a very straightforward process. I had to work through a lot of errors, a lot of dependencies, and once everything was fixed and I ran it for the first time, all it was a blank page with a text interview pilot right in the middle, and that's it. I think by the time I got done with trying to get to something which I can visually see and imagine as looking somewhat like what the final front end would look like, I think Cursor had pretty much changed every file here to some extent.
Hmm. Interesting.
And yeah, eventually, when I was done with that, this is just running on my local system, and this is what it had. Fairly decent for a first attempt. And one thing I want to point out is I did not give it any of this text. I didn't tell it to come up with these three sections. Like none of this was in the prompt. Everything that it did was from that context of the user journey and the user stories that I fed into it. And I didn't want to deal with authentication at this stage because I wanted to look at the actual dashboard. And this is where currently I'm at. When I was at that stage where it was a blank screen with interview pilot, and I asked Cursor to fix things and said, all I see is this blank screen. Just fix it. The next step it came
You,
with was this. A couple of prompts, it got from a blank screen to this. And the filters are even functional here. So you can filter by company.
that's very impressive. So like I think it like you went through like just like an idea to then just like laying out what the plan can be, what like are the possibilities and like narrowing down like the scope, and then eventually using like Claude and Cursor to build this initial proof of concept, which I feel is like impressive because generally when I've done proof of concepts, they are a bit scrappy. Like the look and feel is like not as pretty. But in this case, like the homepage you have, like I want to like use it because it's structured very well. Like as you said, it laid out the value propositions clearly, and the user interface is intuitive, which makes you want to like click on the buttons and start using it.
Yeah, I was impressed with pretty much every single tool that I used for this. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be biased towards a tool and like do everything in ChatGPT. I felt there were fixed reasons to use all these tools. Like I know Claude is generally considered as great for coding. ChatGPT, the voice mode and just being able to have a natural conversation is pretty great. Gemini is great with that large context window that it gives you, and its 2.0 Flash models are pretty quick. So there's different reasons to use different tools.
Yeah, but no, this was a great walkthrough. And I don't know if you're gonna keep building upon it, but I think even like where you ended right now, it's just very impressive. And then the good thing is you have all the documentation from the conversations on ChatGPT and Gemini. You can always go back and see like, hey, what was the original plan, and like that will give you a good starting point to keep refining it.
Yeah, I would always have all the history of the chats that I had with these chatbots, and I could kind of walk myself through my thinking at the time to figure out how I got to this end stage. So that's pretty great. I think this is pretty much the future. There's no going back. And I'm really looking forward to your experience with this as well. So that's going to be our next segment, and we're going to be looking at the no-code tools out there, the Replits and the Bolts and the Lovables of the world. So I'm pretty excited for that because I've not used any of those tools yet. So I'm excited for that walkthrough from you.
Yeah, all I can say right now, it's been a lot of fun using these tools. I feel like my mind has expanded in many ways. Or in fact, like I was mind blown with like the capabilities these tools have and like the ease with which they make things like seamless in the sense that you're able to like test your idea, like play around with your idea and like in a matter of minutes, and it just like allows you to just think very broadly. And sometimes you can even like think deeply as well. So yeah, excited to share that when we chat next.
All right. So that's all for now. And all you got to do is say over and out. And we're done.
Over and out.